Hola, buenas tardes. Hello, good evening, everyone. We're here invited by the Explorer program by Banco Santander X, and we're here to welcome Aniyia Williams, who's a trailblazer, entrepreneur, systempreneur, and I have to tell you, she has all the qualities that I've been looking for in my life. Like, she's a successful entrepreneur. She can sing very well. She has amazing hair, and she knows how to work it. and all in all, I think an inspiration for us entrepreneurs everywhere. So one thing that I am completely in awe about the experience of Aniyia is how she can focus, like zoom in and out from her personal experience to a systemic view of entrepreneurship and how this whole world of becoming entrepreneurs works for every one of us. So I wanted to start by asking you, Aniyia, how did you start? Because you tell a wonderful story about your beginnings as an entrepreneur, as a creator.
Yes, and thank you for this introduction, Marias. I'm like, yes, and the hair is here today. So yeah, okay, I have a very unconventional path to how I got to where I am today, which actually started in music, as you hinted at. So since I was very young, I've always loved to sing. I've always been kind of very into creating things. I think being a creator is something that really defines or sort of combines all of the arc of the things that I've done. But I feel like there's two really major factors which started when I was young, like really as young as, 5, 6 years old, which was one, growing up in a family business as well. Like my family owned a hair school and hair salons in the Philadelphia area in Pennsylvania. And also, like I said, music. And so, the kind of arts and business things sort of followed me through my life. I spent really most of the early part of my life just training to be a classical opera singer. And it feels now like it was a different time ago, a different life ago. But there are so many things from that still actually show up in what I do every day, like speaking on stages, and having to pitch people are very similar to auditions and things like that, in the sense of, trying to get people to buy into you and something that you're doing and what you have to offer. But really, I went into that. I majored, I actually got my degree in music from college with a minor in business. And I was like, okay, I'll just do this business stuff on the side because my dad kept pressuring me that I needed some kind of like business something somewhere. And I was trying to figure out, how do I combine those things into a job after I graduated from college, which also I graduated right as we were going into the Great Recession, like 2007, 2008. And I was really, really lucky that I had done this internship when I was in college at a organization in the DC, Washington, DC area that does, they do concerts and they have an opera company there. And they were looking for people to build up their fundraising team. And I was put into this position to coordinate different kinds of things for their kind of what they called major gifts, which were donors that could give, where we're already giving $25,000 or more to the organization. So they were really people who they were making special relationships with and who were going to fund very special projects, commission new projects that they would create and things like that. And so I learned a lot in that experience about high net worth individuals and how they make decisions about their kind of charitable giving and philanthropy and how organizations are run. And I had a really great manager there and it was fantastic. And then everything shifted all of a sudden. My husband, which at the time he was just my boyfriend, who was a software engineer, he got recruited to work at a startup in San Francisco. And we were like, oh, this is exciting. And we decided to be, young people who were going to, throw caution to the wind and move 3,000 miles away from our families to San Francisco. And then my life just completely shifted from that place, where I really kind of took a lot of the lessons of the things I had done before: music, the arts, fundraising, the business experience, and I wanted to get a foot in the door in the tech industry because everything in Silicon Valley is very tech. I had gone to a tech festival earlier that year for the first time. I went to South by Southwest and I saw what was happening and I was like, this is cool. There has to be something in here. There's somewhere I fit in this picture. I didn't know what it was at the time. But when I got to San Francisco, I very aggressively networked and made new friends, especially friends who worked in startups, even starting with people who were friends and wives of the people that Marco was working with at his tech company. And within a few months, I actually got an opportunity to start working at a startup and I got my foot in the door, which the job I had when I first started there was I was a part-time office manager, which basically my job was to order office supplies, plan happy hours, like jump in on customer support when they needed it, like whatever just needed to be done. Make sure that like the engineers had what they needed to do good coding, and that the office was well stocked. And I was way overqualified for the job, but I was just like, I want to meet new people. This is a cool company. Like, I'm going to see what's going on here. You know, no job is too small. And so I jumped in there. And I think the really amazing thing about startups is that there's always more things that need to be done than there are people to do them. And I mean, I'm putting it through the lens of amazing. It's also like soul crushing at times because there's always so much stuff that needs to get done and there's not enough people. But in this case, for me, I saw that as an opportunity because I realized that if there was something that needed to get done and there was no one doing it and you decided to jump in there and take that on and you did a good job at it, then that becomes your job. And so I feel like moving around in startups is much easier in some ways than more traditional companies because it's very much a like roll up your sleeves and get it done. And if you're helping, you know, the business move forward, then like, okay, now you're the head of this thing. This is your job. And I, through a series of different things like that, I ended up kind of joining all these different teams over time. By the time I ended my time there, it was a company called Voxer that makes a walkie-talkie app for smartphones. And it was way before like there was a Instagram and like those early days. And
early days, like 6 years ago.
Yes, exactly. It was 11 years ago. It was before WhatsApp got acquired by Facebook because Facebook actually tried to acquire our company before that and we turned them down. And then Facebook shut off all of our access to their social graph. Fun times. Anyway, so like I was running the marketing team by the time I kind of started to get this itch. I wanted to do something more. I was looking for a new challenge. I had been working at that startup for about 3.5 years and I had learned a lot and I was ready to kind of level up to the next thing, which I didn't know what it was at the time. But an opportunity kind of came along where, you know, I went and I started to talk to the CEO who I had gotten to grow a really great relationship with over the time that I was at the company. And I told them that I was, you know, looking for a new gig. I didn't know what I was going to do next. Like we had that kind of relationship. And a lot of the people who were really early employees were kind of starting to move to different companies. And it wasn't like a huge surprise. And I was like, but I also have this idea in the back of my head that it's been like bothering me. And I kind of want to see if I can make it happen. And I was like, I want to make a necklace that is also headphones. And I was like, I want to make tech jewelry for women, like electronic jewelry. And he was kind of like, okay, like, well, I was like, do you know any industrial designers is where that started. And he introduced me to a friend of his who then kind of helped me understand the outlines of like what I was about to get myself into. And of course, you know, told me that, you know, you're trying to get into hardware, which is crazy because hardware is like, you know, like if you're looking at the spectrum of like hard things to launch, like making a physical product is definitely on the harder section, especially electronic products, like a whole thing. But I'm just like, I love a challenge. And I feel like every time someone said, this is going to be hard, you're crazy, it's going to be like, and I was just like, that makes me want to do it even more. So yeah, actually with the support of Tom and his friend that he introduced me to, I actually ended up leaving Tom's company, and he became my first angel investor in a company that I started called Tinsel. And we did actually make a necklace that transforms into headphones. I have a patent for it. It was awesome. We had a run that lasted maybe about 4 or 5 years. And, the major issue, which we can get into talking about this later, is that I couldn't secure enough funding to continue ramping up our production to get to kind of the economies of scale that you need to get to make a hardware business sustainable. But we accomplished a lot with a very little amount of funding. And it's one of my most proud achievements, even though it's also technically a failed business. I'm like, it was successful in other ways. And I learned a lot actually, because from that grew all of these other things. Like one, while I was still building Tinsel, I started to really see this disparity that happens with funding for women who are trying to raise money, for people of color who are trying to raise money. And I wanted to do something that would help that. So there were 2 organizations that I helped to start at the same time. One of them is Black and Brown Founders, which is a nonprofit that helps Black and Latinx people start tech-enabled businesses. And the other one was Zebras Unite. And that was really about how do we kind of expand these options around what kind of funding is available. And also how do we start, yes. Go for it.
Exactly. It's okay. So I was going to say precisely that the 2 notions that I kind of get from your story is, first of all, how there's not a single journey towards entrepreneurship from beginning to end, and how somebody that learned business around a hair salon when she was super small, and then started a business degree in college, but then also studied music, could end up having this path. But that probably the reason why you could follow that path was, first of all, because of the ambition, wonderful ambition that you show, but also because you had, I think, all along that kind of systemic view that you talk about that led you to start 2 movements, indeed, that don't work on your particular journey as an entrepreneur, but as are looking into the main issues, into the problems that you saw in these fields. So you started not 1 but 2 entire movements. One of them is Black and Brown Founders, and the other one is Zebras Unite. So if you want to tell us about one of them to begin with.
Yeah, and I think you're spot on, Maria. I think the big thing is that when I was at one level, I would see that there was another level above that, where from a systems kind of view, where I could see that the progress that I am trying to make doing this thing is limited by something that is happening right over here. And I'm going to continue to struggle where I am if I don't try to do something about this problem. And so I would kind of swim up and sort of see what else was there, and how do we start working on this? And then I feel even, and I'll talk about Zebras actually in a moment, but even as I'm thinking about Zebras, right now I also work with Omidyar Network. I started to work there in 2020. Actually, I started during the pandemic, which also feels like another kind of peering up and looking, because now I get to wear 2 hats, and I get to kind of sit on both sides of the table depending on the day. Where now I actually, I call myself a systempreneur, because I feel like there's a lot of entrepreneurial spirit, and I believe really deeply in people becoming owners of businesses. But at the same time, I think that I use business as a vehicle for changing systems. And I think that because businesses actually, at least I can speak about this in the American context, although I imagine this is probably true in any developed country, that businesses have the most power and what happens in your society. And so if you want to change things, 9 times out of 10, people listen to you more when you're a business owner and you are making money and contributing to that ecosystem. So, so that was also, I think, thinking about that from a strategic place, I just feel like some of these things don't happen unless you're able to actually translate what that means for a business and business goals. But to get into Zebras, I think, when we started it, it was really just it was a manifesto. At the beginning, it was, you know, just us being, and by us, I mean myself and my co-founders, Mata Zepeda, Astrid Schultz, Jennifer Brandel, and actually even Jennifer, Jen and Mata for kind of came together first. And then Astrid and I joined a little bit later on. But when we saw the very first thing that Jen and Mata wrote, I was like, oh my God, these women are in my head. Like, how did they know that I was having these thoughts? And then I actually met Mata. We were speaking at the same event, and we were just like talking to each other the entire night and no one else. And just like, you know, we were like, I have whiplash from nodding my head so much from talking to you. And then from there, it was like, we couldn't get rid of each other. We're just like, oh, we're clearly meant to do this together. And so, but it started with us talking about the challenges that we saw, particularly around funding and around the way that, you know, in the tech industry and startups in particular, you know, there's just a very strong like center of gravity, I would say, like that is venture capital, and how that kind of moves and influences a lot of the activity in the tech ecosystem. And also realizing that when you're looking at just the sheer volume of how that works, like it's a model that's naturally built to have only a few winners and a whole lot of losers. Yeah. And like, it's a very much a $1 billion or bust kind of game, where if you are not, like, the idea of what they're trying to do, because, you know, VCs have investors and they are trying to make money for their investors, and they need 10x returns. And that means they need to invest in businesses who they expect to be, you know, $1 billion companies at some point. And getting from 0 to $1 billion is actually really, really hard to do. I feel like there's a statistic I have in a deck somewhere where it's like 0.0004% like 4% chance of someone building $1 billion business. And like everyone else is basically a failure. And so I'm just kind of like,
it's a model that's very profitable for the person that wins the game, but it's a catastrophe for society as a whole.
Exactly, because there's so many incredible businesses that you can build that don't need to be $1 billion businesses to be successful, or to make incredible impact, or to have incredible products. I mean, like, I know like people that have $5 million businesses that are doing transformational things. So there was just this huge gap in between, like, either you're bootstrapping, you know, which we call when people are just using their own money to fund what they're trying to do and build the business from scratch just with what they have. And Black and Brown Founders like kind of focuses on those bootstrapping kind of founders, because we know that this demographic is typically working with such modest resources. We wanted to put together content and education and a network of people who could help you get from, you know, your point A to your point B. If you never saw $1 of investment money, how would you build up this thing? How would you get that off? And like, how would you launch a company? And with Zebras, it was really about, we need more options to finance these businesses. It can't just be credit cards and savings, bank loans, and then venture capital. Like, there needs to be more. And so we've really tried to drive home these other kinds of funding vehicles over the course of what we've been doing.
It is kind of shocking to begin with that you had to like choose one model for like everyone, and then another specific model for Black and Latino founders. Like that you acknowledge first and foremost that there are going to be so many obstacles and roadblocks on the way that you need to adapt to that. We do not talk a lot about race where I live in Madrid, but I think it's a topic that is becoming like hotter, and it should be in fact more discussed. You talk about decentering white people, and how the room that we need to make for Black and Latino and people of color in general revolves around some of the people that are already there being conscious of what's going on and making room for other people to get to the table. So if you, how do you make that happen? What is it that white people should do about it?
Oh, I have a whole list of things that white people can do, but we won't get to cover all of them during this conversation. But I will say this: I think that you know, I'm like, there's so much to say. I will say this. I think that like I mentioned earlier, there's a huge disparity with respect to what kind of funding and opportunities and access people of color and women as well, and especially women of color, like even within that group, even more marginalized, experience and what kind of results they get, even if they, you know, follow the same exact steps as their white male counterparts, you know, they get a very different result. And I think that a lot of that is just baked into the fabric of how our entire world is designed. But especially in America, I feel like we have our own special like flavor of what, you know, what racism and patriarchy look like. And I think that, you know, it's foundational even to how this country even came to be. Like there was a time where Black people, like my ancestors, were considered property, like not actual people, but things to be owned and to be traded and to be used until they could no longer be used anymore, right? And like making that transition into like being a citizen that is like recognized with the same rights, like recognized, I'm going to use an air quote because clearly we're still working on that. But I think like, you know, it shows up in every little thing that we interact with, and every policy and every rule that we interact with. And I think one of the things that's been really interesting, even for me, working in an organization where, like, you know, the last 10 years, I've more or less been working in places that I have, you know, run or started or what have you. And now I'm at a place where, you know, it's my job. And I'm working with a brilliant group of people, and I don't have the same kind of power. I don't make the rules at this company, right? But I think that it's been so interesting to me, especially like during this very, like, even though we've always had issues with race in America, like it feels to me, I mean, granted, I've only been alive for 36 years, but this 21st century moment we're having feels particularly strained and unique and divided, and everyone's in these very splintered realities. And so it's really tough to try to find common ground and understanding. And I think it's just a special moment that actually is giving us the opportunity to peer into the way that people construct their like whole identities and realities around things that either aren't really actually true, or like stories that were told to them about their ancestors and their family that, like, you know, seemed much more like grand and pristine, and then when they actually kind of look at that with a 21st century lens, they realize, oh, it was actually really extractive and harmful, and like people are really trying to contend with all of that. But I think that you know, in the modern context, in the job that I have, I think it's really interesting because I mostly see it every day in this way that shows up in how people do their jobs, and like what people think their jobs is, and like what business as usual kind of looks like. Because I realized that business as usual, the default setting is just, it's like it favors white men, like that is in every way possible. And even when you think about business as usual in the business world, like taking race out of the equation, the default setting, like in America, the way that companies are set up, like your basic kind of corporation that you're just gonna, like, you could literally create one within a few days, like it favors just a few people benefiting from it, like a few shareholders who are going to get all of the wonderful trappings of that business, and everybody else is just kind of like working, and all that money just like ladders right up to the people who own it, right? So this idea of extraction is also, it's just like there are these default things that have been designed and how we've operated for hundreds and hundreds of years. So it's not something we're going to untangle overnight, but it definitely takes us like actually looking at and examining them to change it.
Yeah, definitely. And it's amazing how you can see, like, use something as, come and say, as business, and then take it up there to solve the problems of our day.
Yeah.
So on this same line, you talk about how it is often like one of the crises of the conflicts of our time is how people look to governments for solutions, so they look for to
Oh, yeah.
corporations for solutions, and there is also a gap there that is waiting to be filled, right? Like that.
Absolutely. Yes, I love this. This is so there's a really fantastic book written by a woman named Sarah Horowitz called Mutualism, which I think I love. I read this book about a year or two ago, and I feel like it was so wonderful because there were just all these things that I kind of knew and understood, and it crystallized things in such a way that I'm like, yes, this is what I've been thinking. And I feel like that's where I kind of got this framing from that really helped me understand even where the work that I do like fits in the picture of something more bigger than me. So to your point, you have on one side, and I think of things in terms of spectrums quite a lot. And it's like on one end of the spectrum, you have, like you said, government intervention, government showing up to make sure that the welfare of the people is like good and like things are happening that are making a healthy, thriving society, hopefully. That also does like seems like that's in a little bit of trouble these days all around the world. But in the ideal situation, that's what government would do. And then on the other side of the spectrum, you have you have corporations, you have capital markets, you have in the United States like very neoliberal kind of form of capitalism, and it's very much driven by like market activity and growth and more, and if it's not helping us with the growth and making our returns to the shareholders, then it is not a priority. And so that leaves this huge gap, because with government, even though and I think a lot of people, like, this might be a controversial statement, but I think a lot of people really lean too hard on government to be the like solution provider. But I think that there's just like a lot of space where government just can't solve those problems, because government can't get close enough to the problems to be actually able to come up with a viable solution to the problems, right? And then on the capitalism side, where they could get close enough if they wanted to, but they don't have an incentive to. So like, let's just take an example, because I think a lot of it comes back to the things that show up as, like, in America, at least, as bare necessities of what people need, like housing or clean water, like different kinds of things where it's just like, government is like thinking about things at this huge macro level and the hundreds of millions of people and whatever else, and like one little town and one little part of like one little state and whatever, like, and all the problems that those people are having around, like, let's say clean water or whatever, like they aren't going to be as familiar with every kind of way in which like that ecosystem in itself kind of functions to be able to solve. Like, you need the community to show up to actually help you get to the right solution of what is going to happen with this water, right? And on the corporate side, it's like, well, if it doesn't make me money to clean up the water, why would I spend my money on that? So then you have this gap, and we see community steps into that space. And I think also with some of the work I do at Omidyar Our Network, I do some work, supporting the infrastructure of mutual aid groups. And that is another example of like the whole idea of mutual aid, the whole concept of mutual aid really came out of like people who were left to fend for themselves, and the community stepped in to try to solve a problem. And we just see it happen over and over again. So
but this is different from what we've been hearing about impact entrepreneurship. It's like a different level that you're talking about.
Yeah, I'm like, I'm gonna tread carefully here, because I feel like I don't want to say bad things about like social impact, like philanthropy or investing, but I think that the way in which we have manifested it, I think it has produced some positive things, but it hasn't really been implemented when I've seen it. Like the examples that I have seen, so I'm only speaking from what I know, but like the examples that I have seen have not really implemented it in a way where people, like where philanthropy or investors are showing up and actually working with community. They are working for community, right? Like I think at the end of the day, their interests often still come first. I've seen a lot of examples of like a highly kind of paternalistic dynamic there, where it's kind of like, well, we are going to come and save your village, instead of even like starting from the point of like, maybe the people in the village actually know quite a bit about this problem. We should ask them what they need first before we just come throwing solutions at them, which is just a very common thing that happens. And I see that even happen in the world of business. I see this happen every day with young entrepreneurs who come asking me for advice about a business they want to build, and they're just like, I have this great idea. And it's just like, okay, like, it's like, this is going to be $1 billion industry. And I'm like, sure. But I'm like, do you like, what's the actual problem that you're trying to solve? And they don't know. And I'm just like, if you're not solving a problem, why are you making this? Did anyone ask you for this?
Yeah, so you're talking about a kind of a new concept, this idea of entrepreneurship driven by demand more than it being driven by offer, something like that, right? Like
Right.
that it is the community that leads the way, say. So how is Zebras Unite related to this?
Yes, because I think like so much of the practices of what Zebras does is grounded in people. It's grounded in people, and it's grounded in listening to people and trying to hone what it looks like to do that as an organization, to go from us, like as the co-founders and even the folks that work at the organization, at the level of us just listening and being attentive as people and trying to show up and care and give people what they need. Like, what does it look like when you actually systematize that and make it so that like this entire like organization is an engine that is able to listen to the needs of entrepreneurs who are out there actually trying to use business to solve the most pressing problems, or trying to make the world a better place literally through their businesses. What do they need? What challenges are they facing? Because the other part of it too is, you know, Zebras in general, like we are operating outside the box in some kind of way. Like Zebras and all the zebra companies, not specifically Zebras Unite, we are too, but like that just comes with a lot of like, the best way that I like to put it is like headwinds. Like if you're flying, like there's just a lot of like drag, a lot of resistance. There is no like easy, like, oh, so people have walked this path so many times. Like, no, you might be the first one, or maybe the first handful of people. Like you need to take a machete with you, bring some water, a backpack, some warm clothes, because it's going to be a ride. Okay. And so I think that like, that's also, you know, one of the things that I am trying to use the resources and the what I have working at Omidyar Network is like, how do I help create the conditions for zebra companies or zebra adjacent companies like to be successful? Like, how do we, like, I think that's the role that philanthropy can actually play, is like being the R&D wheel for like, how do we actually create the conditions that people need to solve their own problems?
Yeah, that's absolutely fantastic. So we have some questions here from the audience.
Yeah.
We have this one. In your experience, how can you overcome ethical barriers from a business environment which is not equal?
Yes, I would say that the biggest thing is, you know, understanding that if like having equity, like, and I want to differentiate like the idea of equity from the idea of equality, where equality to me kind of represents sameness and everyone having the same thing. And equity to me accounts for the fact that everybody starts at a different place. Everyone has different skills. Everyone has a different understanding and experience in the world. But that like they still have the ability to make something real and to like realize their purpose, right? Like, and to me, to achieve equity, like if that is a goal, if equity is a goal, then like safety also has to be a goal. And I think we don't talk a lot about that, but I would say like there's the very obvious ways I mean safety, like, you know, if you're a woman, if you're a person of color and you're in a room and you don't feel like you are safe, like that, there's that. But there's also like an actual piece of building businesses and things that comes down to psychological safety, like in your mind, when you're trying to build out a plan and a strategy for what your business is ultimately going to do. Like, does the financing that you have make it feel like you can actually make the decisions you need to make, or do you feel like you have to make other decisions based on like what you promised to the person that gave you that money, right? Like, so that's a thing that happens in VC a lot, right? Venture-backed companies, even if founders come in with really beautiful hearts and minds and souls about how they want to do things to help the world, I'm not saying it's impossible, but I would say that like there are times where, and more often than not, when you're trying to grow past a certain point, you have to make decisions to try to get your business from maybe like $20 million a year in revenue to like $100 million a year in revenue, that like, then that's like where I feel like these major ethical questions start to come in. And it often just comes back to like this idea of business model. So one, I would say that like thinking about, again, like the ways that you're making promises, like I think that your commitments to the different stakeholders that are involved in your business are probably going to be one of the biggest factors that affects, like, even if you are the most moral and ethical person that ever lived on planet Earth, you're going to have to contend with that tension, and you're going to have to figure out how to navigate it. And then the other part of it is like, if you're trying to create an environment that is like ethical and equitable in your company, then you also should know that again, that sameness and fairness are not the same thing. And sometimes that means you have to actually advantage, like you can't just be neutral, you can't be impartial, you need to actually give an advantage to someone who is disadvantaged so that they can actually participate. Like that is the thing that a lot of people don't understand.
Yes. So kind of decentering yourself.
Yes.
I see a very, very good question here. A book that inspired you.
A book that inspired me? Oh my gosh, so many. Okay, so I mentioned one of them, Mutualism.
I'm going to ask the moderators if you can to like find the link for them and post it. Yeah.
So Mutualism is one of them. I also actually really like, in terms of like business kinds of books, I like Profit First, which I know sounds maybe the title antithetical to all the things I'm talking about, but Profit First is just really a matter of like how you manage your business expenses so that you always have money set aside that it's just really about how you structure your like financial operations. And I love that book. Also, Atomic Habits by James Clear, which has been like resurging lately, probably because we're at the beginning of the year. Everyone's got New Year's resolutions and they want to change their new year, new you. But Atomic Habits, I think, is a fantastic book because there's actually a seed of an idea within that gets to the very core of human behavior. And for folks that know me, they know I love to nerd out about human behavior and neurology, and why people do what they do it's like a constant interest and fascination that I have, and part of why I love people so much. Like I just love watching and understanding people and how we work. But anyway, there's something at the seed of that is around how identity and how systems actually help you produce outcomes. And like one of those things is around, a lot of people tend to think about, like, have a goal orientation to how they want to achieve something. Like, I want to lose 20 pounds. And then we kind of, most people, I think, sort of have a little bit of magical thinking that like, just by stating the intention to lose 20 pounds, that like the pounds will start to come off. But it is actually through the actions that you take that get you there. And so it's about like, if you are trying to lose 20 pounds, like you actually have to like, first, like, just like embody the mindset of someone who wants to like lose 20 pounds, or who is a healthy person is probably more accurate. And then you have to do the things that healthy people do. And you have to like then design your environment and the activities that you do to actually support like being healthy, which will ultimately help you lose weight, so that it's not just all of the intensity of like, I gotta lose 20 pounds. Cause then it's like, let's say you do actually do it. And then what? Like, what now? But like, because it's really easy to gain those 20 pounds back right after you like check that box. But it's the systems that got you there, and then maintaining those and making those a permanent part of who you are and what you do, that keeps those 20 pounds off for the rest of your life, So,
So we have another question here. Do you think if zebras unite, can start in some places like Mexico? So I'm guessing that's, how can somebody join Zebras Unite, or how can it be extended to other countries?
Absolutely. In fact, I'm pretty sure, I think we have a chapter in Mexico. It might be in Mexico City. We have quite a few chapters. So I would definitely encourage everyone to go to zebrasunite.com or zebrasunite.coop. I'm pretty sure they both go to the same place. And there should be a section on our website that specifically lists all of our chapters. You can join a chapter. If there isn't a chapter where you are, you can start a chapter. And I believe, like I said, I think we have 24 chapters all over the world. So yes, please do.
Everywhere. Please do.
Where?
So we have a few questions as well about how to find partners or how to find people to commit it to your startup when you're not having a profit yet. I think this is another side of something that you were talking about earlier, that because there seems to be only one way forward, then when you're not following that way, maybe everything becomes more complex, even finding people to join your venture when you're not like offering equity or planning an exit in 5 years time or whatever.
Yeah. So if you will allow me to kind of pivot my like I think we've talked about a lot of stuff and also very at the systems level. I'd love to kind of like dig a little bit more into how like launching startups and starting from basically from zero, right? There's a couple things that I like to share with people. So I want to make sure I share those here. One is like I mentioned earlier, like you want to make sure that you're solving a problem. And the thing that I think is really great. I have a friend, Tara Reed, who is just one of the most inspiring entrepreneurs that I know. And she has these 3 questions that she always like tells people that until you have like found product market fit, which is what we call in the tech industry, refer to that as like the place where your product and like the market that you're serving, like the people that are paying you money, like you found the sweet spot where all you have to do is just like pour gasoline on it and like go however far you want it to go, right? But like until you get to product market fit, your job is to answer these 3 questions. And the first question is, does anybody want this? The second question is, will they pay you money for it? And the third question is, why are they paying you money? Like what features of what you're doing are important that like are making people pay you money, right? And I feel like that's like a very solid frame, and I always come back to that, and it has held up like every time. And so I want to start with like you solve a problem, and those 3 questions I think are really good framing to like help you know if you have solved a problem or not. At least solve the problem in a way that a business can be viable, because you can solve a problem and not make money, but then that would just make it a hobby. And then the other part of it is community. So this touches on this person's question, is that after you kind of understand the problem that you're trying to solve, you want to really start to talk to people about that problem. And I think that the other thing I usually tell people about the problem they want to solve is that if you're going to have, it's not impossible, but you are going to have the highest likelihood of success if you solve a problem for a community that you already are a part of or have access to, like a meaningful access to. And that goes back to some of the things I was saying earlier when I was talking at this higher systemic level, which is that if you're trying to solve a problem for an audience that you don't really know, or, you know, in an industry that you're not as familiar with, you are not going to win. You're not going to win. You're not going to come up with the best solution, because the best solutions are going to come from people who actually intimately understand and experience the problem, right? And so when you start at that place from things that you deeply know, and it doesn't even have to be, you know, it doesn't have to start from, you know, looking at companies as big as Apple and saying that one day I want to be able to build some supercomputer. I think like you should really lean on what your individual skills are, because a lot of the approach that I have taken and that we usually teach folks at Black and Brown Founders is to lean on their most valuable skills that to build the business, right? So solving a problem, doing it in a way that's unique to something that you can do. Maybe you have experience in graphic design, and so you can like do XYZ thing that will kind of put you above other people who are trying to solve this problem. Or you could use your graphic design skills to solve the problem in a unique way that someone else can't do, right? And then the community piece is that, because eventually you're going to need to sell the product to somebody. And so it helps when you actually start to build the audience from day one. And I think that your audience can naturally start with the community that you're part of as well, right? So when you start thinking about, oh, I got to put together a list so I can send people some emails, or, oh, I need to like send them some text messages, or I need some people I can figure out how to target on Facebook, or whatever it is that you're doing to try to get the word out later after you actually have a product, you want them to kind of be invested and like go along with the journey. Those are going to be your early adopters. Your community is going to be your early adopters. So solving a problem for a community you have access to or are part of is like the most important thing in my mind for all of those reasons. And then the other thing I would say is like really thinking about your business model, trying to like work some numbers in and understand, you know, how it's going to actually make money. So then you can actually test that. Then you're going to build a prototype. It doesn't have to be the fanciest, beautiful, polished thing, which I will say as a recovering perfectionist, I definitely am like prone to fall into the trap of like, it has to be more polished. But I will say that like, I have seen it happen where like things that look janky also make money because it delivers on its promise, right? So like, it doesn't have to be pretty. It doesn't have to be the fanciest thing. It literally just needs to actually solve the problem that you set out to solve. And if it's doing it well, people will pay you money for it. And so I think that, you know, being able to do that, and as you prototype and like put something out there, the other piece of that that I encourage people to really pay attention to is feedback loops, is what I would call it. But you always, every time you're trying to test something, right? Like every time you are solving a problem, you build something to solve that problem, you put it out there. Now you have to actually verify if it worked. And unless you have some kind of like mechanism, some system, something, whether it's just like a little pop-up that comes up on the screen that says, did this help you solve your problem? Yes or no? And someone clicks it. And then you're like, okay, 10 out of 10 people said it solves the problem, whatever, but you need something to know that it's actually working. So you have
learn
to look
from it.
Exactly. You have to be learning from it, because without that, you won't know what to do more of and what to do less of. And especially if you're, you know, working with scrappy resources, like knowledge is your friend. Like you have to make up for not having money with knowing what the heck is going on with your business and what the heck is going on with the people you're trying to help.
Yeah. That's super spot on. So we only have time for one more question. And I wanted to ask you, so where are you going from here? What's your plan?
Ooh, big question. I'm like the moon and the stars is the thing I want to say. But no, I would say honestly, like I'm going deeper into community. That's what I feel like. I think I'm realizing that there is a skill set that I have honed on during my journey, which actually I would say some of it due to like the business stuff we talked about during this hour, but honestly, most of it thanks to my marriage and having a kid and raising a child. I have learned a lot about management and people and conflict resolution through just literally having a husband and a daughter. And I think that I realized that I've got the ability to really help connect and bring people together and to listen and hear people and try to help. And so I'm leaning really hard into that. The project that I'm working on that will be launching later this year at Omidyar Network is very much about how we take community-based action towards building a new ecosystem or a new economy or whatever it's going to be. I'm not the one that gets to decide, which is kind of the point. And so I think that it's just very exciting to actually specifically even be in a role as a funder and literally try to show up and just do all of the things that I had wished that funders would have done when I was on the other side of the table. So that's what I'm excited about.
That's amazing. So thank you very much. It's been a truly inspiring chat, and I've learned a lot from you, and I'm sure everybody in the audience has. So from this point, I have to remember the members of the Explore program to join us here on Zoom. And thank you, Aniyia, for having this time with us. And thank you, everybody, for attending and for sharing these chat with us. And hopefully we'll see you in the next Explore chat.